for a moment and imagine it to be the case. As generations of Christianity evolved, it was not so much personal experience that was encouraged by the organized church, but assent to ideas about God as presented by professional theologians. But unfortunately, it seems that theology of the latter sort has set for itself an impossible task. How can we, as finite creatures, hope to understand that which, by definition, is greater than anything that can be conceived? Contradiction prevails. This is where art becomes important for contemporary theology, and for ministry, for that matter. With visible evidence of emptying pews and graying congregations, the question of relationship between theology and lived experience must come to the fore in seminary teaching. Theory without experience, like faith without works, is dead. I propose that art be used to help bridge the gap between ideas and experience. As a sensual experience, art provides alternative ways of knowing, which can fling open doors to understanding. Faith-seeking understanding via the way of art is rooted in intimate encounter. For this to happen, intellectual reflection must remain on the periphery, if you will. Through the experience of art, whether as creators or as spectators, we can know, much in the same way as medieval mystics claimed to know the divine through their visions and encounters. Julian of Norwich, Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross, and others were quick to point out that their words were woefully inadequate to articulate the depth of their experience of the mysteries of God. Even the great theologian Thomas Aquinas is said to have experienced an intense mystical awakening near the end of his life that had led him to speak of his written works as straw compared to what he now understood from his experience. Because art is a hermeneutical circle of experience, reflection, experience, and so on, it can provide a model for integrating theology and lived experience. Like ritual, art invites us into a world beyond itself, where feeling, emotion, and intuition override intellectual methodologies of learning and knowing. And I have a little footnote. This is not to say that art is not intellectual, but that at its core, it is first a sensory experience. That it is, it's perceived through the senses. That's what makes it art, and not just a concept or only a concept. So instead of trying to nail down the meaning of a work, or even a meaning of a work, an artwork, we are asked first to sit in the ambiguity of our suspended disbelief, devoting time and space for the truths of this other world to reveal themselves through the art process. Only after the experience do we begin to reflect on it. In fact, reflection is a sign that our participation in the experience has ended. Reflection on the experience of art, making or viewing, can be the breeding ground for insights from that other world. As our circular process continues, these new insights inform our intuition and eventually even theoretical knowledge, contributing to an expanded range of understanding. I could see this process unfold in some of the students of the Wabash Project. Interviews from participants revealed that their learning, while perhaps not as broad in terms of information gathering like their peers who were writing a 5,000-word essay, whose approach was intellectual, the students from the Wabash Art Project, told me that their experience of learning deepened in ways that were unexpected and even a bit frightening for some. One student writes of his experience with the art making in this project, and I quote, "The finished result of this painting has produced the emotion in me of the blotting out of sins, which is not where I intended to go. Letting go of the overly literal representation of the cross allowed me to achieve a more stunning result, in my opinion, had I not experimented with the gold covering and alcohol on the surface of the painting. I would have been left with a fairly boring, obvious work with which I was not happy. Later in the course, the same student, beginning to create and understand a symbolic language for his use of color, writes, I wanted to use primary colors to accentuate the differences of identification dependent on context, and I wanted to layer these colors to represent the layering or overlapping of these identities. Another student, when asked whether the art process helped or hindered her progress, responded, it's been a struggle, failure, possible failure is real, really challenging. Handed a canvas, I feel stupid. Handed paint, I still feel stupid. But then, there it is. Still another student, when asked whether the project had been worthwhile, replied, writing about other people's thoughts is just rewording. 2,000 years of saying the same thing. The artwork is a new expression because it's out of my head. I don't have to quote anyone. Is there value in this? Absolutely. It would seem that by inviting deeper individual and intimate experience relating to theological concepts, the art process can help narrow the gap between theory and its essential experiential underlay. Theology removed from everyday life experience does not incite, or Freudian slip, does not, do that one again. Theology removed from everyday life experience does not excite or inspire us. The theology which is experienced by the heart can be a source of strength and even joy, as our understanding is tested in light of personal experience. Perhaps this is what Pascal meant when he wrote, the heart has its reasons, whereof reason knows nothing. Because the object of theological study is God, it is our responsibility to use any and all means at our disposal to enlarge our understanding of the divine. To do otherwise is to reduce our concept of God into that which can be readily conceived. We see this in immature theologies which spell out mysteries claiming to be beyond description, but the integration claim to be beyond description, and we all know what that is. That's the appeal to the mystery when asked something, oh, well, it's a mystery, and so you can't explain that. But, this is what it's like, or this is what it is. The integration of art with theology permits a new approach, one that's not satisfied by answers, but with the creation of new questions, an approach that respects the empty spaces left by rational thought. Perhaps our best advice in this regard comes from a philosopher. At the end of his Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, Ludwig Wittgenstein wisely concluded, whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must remain silent. Okay. Well, that was silent long enough. Yeah. So that hopefully provides an overview of what we've been doing, and just a little bit of the background behind what has driven me to give up 2 years of my life to work for nothing. Well, not nothing, but financially nothing. Of course, artists are kind of used to that, so it wasn't that much of a stretch. But so maybe we could have some dialogue around that before David makes his presentation, if you like. Are there any questions? Over here, yes?
I have a question. You raised something that's very interesting to me, and that is that integrating art and theology reaches empty spaces and raises more questions. Can you give me some idea of what you mean by empty spaces?
Okay, I'll try. Empty spaces. Did everyone hear the question? Yes? Okay. Empty spaces are those moments where you do not need to use rational discourse to explain what's going on. The moments of knowing, mystical moments. There's so many different, what Nick Webb of NASCAD calls plastic words that can be interchangeable and so on, to describe that which you cannot describe. But the idea here is that we cannot, I mean, we really haven't come a long way from the Anselm. We cannot describe that which, is beyond our conception. And so how do we relate to that? And my thinking is, instead of proposing answers, we can take all of our answers and put them together, and we still do not have a definition of what is God or who is God. So the creating of more questions broadens the scope of our experience and our understanding as a result of that.
So I guess just a response. Are you saying then that the concept of theology as a rational intellectual pursuit, does that lead to questions, or is it just our human nature of these questions?
I'm sorry,
Is it our human nature of these questions, or is it the fact that theology has in the past been mostly
Yay.
The concept of empty spaces further. Is it the spaces that are caused by our human nature and our inability to conceive of reality, or is it the fact that we've only chosen one path, which is an intellectual pursuit?
Very nice. I think that's both. I think that the intellectual pursuit has just merely taken precedence, and since the written word became so accessible. But now, things are changing. It's becoming a visual world. We are a screen-based culture. We even read our books on the screen. So we have to get used to that. And images, whether we like it or not, can be read. And you can learn to read them in ways that are helpful, or you can just let them influence you, and they will over time. I think Coca-Cola, back in the 30s or something, did one of those studies, probably know about that, where they flashed ads every 30 seconds. So you couldn't see them, but they were images, and they influenced people to buy their product. It's like the government conspiracy or something, but I'm not suggesting that. But I do think that it's both. I think that the overriding of that leaves us with a real hunger. And I sensed that when I did some of my courses for my MTS at NASCAD in aesthetics, some courses in aesthetics. And I sensed that with some of the younger students there who wanted to talk about things that we would call a spiritual nature, but they don't have a language for it at NASCAD. In fact, Dr. Webb, who is professor of critical studies there, says there are two words you can't say at an art college. One is beauty, and the other one is God. Otherwise, you will not be taken seriously. And so that's sad. But I sense a grassroots sort of thing happening. I mean, conceptual art has been around for a while, and it's doing its thing, and it's getting lots of funding, and now integrative new media art, and so on. But people have spiritual needs, and artists are very sensitive people. So it just makes sense to me that the purely intellectual direction is just not going to be enough. Does that answer? Yeah. That's your punishment for asking a question.
I'd just like to ask the question about what forms of art. You mentioned that students used painting. Mm-hmm. What other media did you use in the workshops?
Well, for this project, we had to be very limited. There was one person in the group who was an artist who had an NFA in art, a Masters of Fine Art, and she just basically, you do what you need to do. But for the others who had little or no experience, we couldn't, and we only had limited time and financial resources. It would be overwhelming to offer too many choices. It would be like, I think the whole time would have been spent with, what will I do? So we had to move it along. So I chose acrylic paint because it's easy to apply. There are no smells that people can complain about, etc. And so I had to limit pretty much. But if you look at the exhibition, you'll see collage was introduced, and some people took advantage of that.